Hello there, and welcome back to the channel. So, the other day I was perusing through Netflix with my dad, and we found this movie called Red. My dad asked if I had seen it before, to which I said no. Given that he had seen it, he said we should watch it, and press play. That's when our curiosities peaked. We both saw the DC logo roll in. Huh, that's weird. I soon found out there was actually a sequel too, which we watched a few days later. This got me thinking, this is a pretty weird franchise for DC. Now, I don't call this weird because it's got a bizarre story or sus material. And it's not even because these movies are bad. No, they've got a relatively simple story and they're actually quite enjoyable. I call these the weirdest DC movies because it seems so strange to me that out of the vast catalog of DC characters, this was the one that got turned into a movie. Red came out in 2010. By this point, we got in a movie about this really obscure character before Wonder Woman and The Flash. The GOAT still needs a movie that'll do him justice. Man, what the hell is this abomination?
They're colliding and collapsing.
What the hell happened here?
And look, Flashpoint Paradox is a great movie, don't get me wrong, but can we please tell Flash stories outside of Flashpoint now? That storyline's getting kind of tiring now. Anyways, it just seems odd to me that a rather unknown character got a movie before so many others. They've been doing Nightwing and Zatanna dirty. I mean, out of all characters, why this one? And what's weirder is that if you took the DC logo out of the movie, it wouldn't even be recognizable as a DC property. It's sort of your standard middle of the road action flick. There's no obvious connection to the wider DC universe, no supernatural or otherworldly elements in it, not even any costumes that would suggest this was from a comic. So, what gives? That's what I aim to find out in today's episode. Spoilers for the Red franchise. To begin my journey, I asked my cousin what he knew about Red. He's the biggest comic book fan I know. His knowledge on comic books, specifically DC, is so vast. He owns so many issues. If anyone would know about an obscure DC character, it would be him. Yeah, so he didn't know who he was. He actually had to look up what Red was online. That was pretty shocking to me. I mean, I wouldn't have been as surprised if it was some random publisher. He's obviously not going to know about every comic ever published, but this was DC, one of the hallmarks of his life. This story was much more obscure than I initially realized, which made me even more confused as to why this was a story that got turned into a movie. Well, looks like I had to do my own research.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
Before I continue, if you have extensive knowledge of comics or the movie industry and I get something wrong, please let me know. A lot of the research I tried doing didn't lead me anywhere too useful, so please bear with me. Now, my cousin did know the imprint that published the Red comic, Wildstorm. If you don't know what an imprint means, it's sort of an offshoot from the main publisher. This is generally to appeal to other demographics outside your core audience. As a very basic analogy, think of Disney. The first thing people think of when they hear the word Disney is animated films like Snow White or Steamboat Willie. But they own Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and ABC, making all of those Disney brands. Now, I'm sure this isn't a perfect comparison with legal definitions and such, but in a general sense, DC Comics operates in a similar way. Elseworlds, Vertigo, and Impact are DC imprints you may have heard of before. Now, Wildstorm was originally a part of Image Comics, founded in 1992. Image is an indie comic publisher that wanted more creative independence from the stricter ways of Marvel and DC. Invincible and Spawn are Image's most recognizable original works. Jim Lee, one of the founders, had this to say about Wildstorm. During the startup of Image Comics, I incorporated my business activities under the name Aegis Entertainment. As Aegis grew and the marketplace changed, I decided a new name would more accurately define the nature of the titles we produce. The name Wildstorm is a combination of what their two most successful comics were, Wildcats and Stormwatch. As you might be able to tell, these comics come from an era where being edgy was the big thing to do. I mean, look at Deadpool, Watchmen, and the Yuzhan Vong. All were a product of the 90s and early 2000s. Wildstorm also had a heavy emphasis on more espionage type stories, rather than the traditional superhero format. Now, as many of us know, the comic industry wasn't doing so hot in the late 90s. Jim Lee decided to leave Image Comics and sold Wildstorm to DC in 1998. At the time, this was a win-win since Wildstorm gave DC a more mature audience to earn from. Plus, Wildstorm was able to maintain its autonomy and do its own thing, so the writers wouldn't have to feel constrained by the limits of the mainline universe. Fun fact, James Gunn's new universe will feature characters from this new era of Wildstorm, a team called the Authority, who are the successors to Stormwatch. I'm curious to see how James Gunn will mesh these two universes, but
a good question for another time.
Both Stormwatch and the Authority were written by Warren Ellis, who was one of Wildstorm's most consistent writers. In 2003, he wrote a 3-issue miniseries called Red. Oh, so this is where the comic comes in. Yeah, so I'm going to keep it $1.50. Finally learning where it came from made me even more confused. It wasn't even a long-running series like Wildcats or Stormwatch. It was a pretty much one-shot story, which according to the writers would only make up like 40 minutes of a movie. And it's not like V for Vendetta that sold tons of copies. I mean, maybe that was the case for Red. Guys, I tried finding solid numbers for how well this miniseries did. I really did. And I just can't find any. I couldn't find any financial incentive or fan campaigns about this comic. Man, I didn't realize how far this rabbit hole was going. I seriously just could not find any information about this. It's so weird to me. Okay, so somehow after some digging around, I was able to find a 2010 article from Publishers Weekly about the comic and the film. Coley Hamner, who was the artist for the Red comic, had a lot of interesting details about how the comic came about. Funny enough, he met Warren Ellis through America Online chat rooms back in the early 2000s. Here's what he had to say. If there were no internet, there wouldn't have been an opportunity for us to do Red. I basically sent a pitch to Warren for something completely different, just to see if he would say anything. And I think within 2 minutes, I got a return email. It's Warren saying, I was literally just about to send you this. And it was the one-page pitch for Red. Thus, the dynamic duo was born, and they created the comic. According to Hamner, the miniseries sold between 15,000 and 20,000 copies per issue. These are the only numbers I've been able to find about how successful the comic was. It's important to note though that these numbers are coming from the creator, not any official DC numbers. I'm choosing to believe him because it's the only thing I can go off, and frankly I'm tired of doing research. Regardless, it must have done at least pretty well for an independent writer because someone noticed it and turned it into a movie. Now, if any of you have actually seen the film, it is very different from the comic it's adapted from. The miniseries is a very dark story. Paul Moses is a retired CIA agent trying to live the rest of his days in seclusion. When a new CIA director gets wind of Moses' dark past, he fears a public outcry if his story were ever to be released. So, he orders the assassination of Moses. Of course, that fails and Moses is pissed now, thus beginning his re-emergence from retirement and his bloody revenge on the CIA. It's not just me, right? This sounds pretty similar to another franchise.
Guns. Lots of guns.
Red is a dark tale about a tragic character. It asks us questions about morality and redemption. Paul Moses knows the horrors he's committed. He starts the story trying to atone for his sins, only to be forcefully brought back as a killer. Given enough time, would Moses have been able to atone for his past? Would he have been able to find peace? The comic also asks us questions about our country and government. Paul claims men used to stand up for what they believed was right, even if it meant doing whatever it took. But now they're all boys in suits looking to win a popularity contest. Paul believes he was doing things for the security of his country, but now he thinks it might have all been a lie. Are individuals to blame for horrific acts? Or is it systems that force people to do horrible things? Since Paul Moses is the main character, we're gonna sympathize with his views. He doesn't even go completely insane. He lets his telephone handler live, even though he'd normally kill her. But I can appreciate that this comic doesn't shy away from his dark past, forcing us to wonder if he's truly in the right here. Near the end, Moses confronts the director, saying he killed the director's family.
I don't threaten. I don't pose. I don't play. I kill people. That's all I've done since I was 19 years old.
His bloodlust makes this believable. Even though it did just end up being a threat, the fact you can believe it's true makes his character all the more chilling. As the comic closes, Paul Moses faces an army of guards. He finally admits his true nature. Pointing his gun up, he says,
I'm the monster. Do your best.
Why? 'Cause I'm a bad guy? I'm scum?
Can I just shoot him now?
No. You don't have people killed. I have people killed. I'm the bad guy. Remember?
so why is the film so funny?
You're not going without me.
Well, we're getting the band back together.
As a refresher, I began this journey asking, why this character? What drove DC to make a movie about this particular story? The answer, I believe, comes from an interview with Gregory Novak, an executive producer of the film.
I read the comic book right before I started working at DC in 2003, and I loved it immediately. And as I started at DC, I said, you know, this would make a great movie. And one of our mandates there was to not just do the superhero stuff, you know, Superman and Batman, but take advantage of this amazing library. And it was just something that I targeted really early on. I always felt it had a great story and a great tone and just a great look, and I really loved it.
So I guess that explains it. It looks like this was also a passion project, much like the comic was. I can't really question that. I get wanting to share something you really enjoy, no matter how silly or niche it might seem. If he loved this story and wanted to share that story with others, I can't really blame him. In fact, I actually applaud him. I guess all my confusion goes to rest then.
Don't look at me, she's your girlfriend.
Huh. This doesn't seem like the gritty comic at all though. Yeah, so I left out some information about Novak. From 2003 to 2010, he was the Senior VP of Creative Affairs at DC. The goal was for him to expand DC's entertainment beyond Batman and Superman. There was a huge library of characters that hadn't been explored, at least to the general public. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm completely roasting this guy or anything, but I'm sorry, he just didn't do that great a job. I mean, let's look at the other films that came out during his time. V for Vendetta, Constantine, Jonah Hex. First of all, while these may be DC properties, the general public doesn't recognize these characters as part of DC's lineup. They're C-listers. On top of that, a lot of these films really separate themselves from the source material and opt for a more grounded approach. It's not to say these movies are bad. Okay, some of them are really bad. But let's be real, this period didn't do that much to expose the general public to DC. Again, why are we getting a movie about Jonah Hex before Martian Manhunter or Nightwing, core members of the DC lineup? The more research I do about this, the more confused I get. Now, to give credit where credit is due, Novak did help produce the Dark Knight trilogy, which really helped people understand how well comic book stories could be. We'll get back to Novak later, but regardless of all this, I do still think Red was a passion project on some level, even if the movies are pretty different from the comic. The reason I say this is because Warner Brothers actually wasn't interested in making this movie. After some deliberation, Novak went to Summit Entertainment to get the movie produced, which is pretty crazy since most of DC's films have been produced by Warner Brothers or one of their companies. You're telling me they weren't okay with Red, but they were okay with the abomination that is the Flash movie?
Failure.
Anyways, if he was just picking characters at random, I don't think he'd go through the effort of going to a whole different studio to get the movie made. Pre-production finally started in 2008 after Summit approved the movie. Lorenzo di Bonaventura was producing it, and they got Bruce Willis as the lead role. I'm pretty surprised how quickly they got this film out. They began filming in January of 2010, and the film released later that same year in October. Man, that's a quick turnaround. So, how'd the film do?
Congratulations, Mr. Krabs.
Hello, I like money.
The first movie earned a total of $199 million at the box office. Now, that might sound like chump change by today's standards, but the budget was only $59 million. Accounting for marketing, that bumps the budget up to $118 million, meaning Red was actually pretty successful. You gotta remember, this was a time when studios actually knew how to handle budgets properly. Studios, if you lowered your budgets, maybe you wouldn't see failure after failure at the box office.
But that's simply not possible.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
The reception to the film was pretty positive too. It's got 72% for both the audience and critic scores. Now, it doesn't seem like Warren Ellis and Coley Hamner were too involved with the project. In that Publishers Weekly article I mentioned earlier, Hamner says he would have liked more involvement with the project, but he understands the movie's take was pretty different. Both he and Ellis don't seem to hold it against the production team. Hamner actually got to do more projects for Red. He drew covers for prequel comics canon to the movie. These covers actually go pretty hard, not gonna lie. Now that I think about it, the promotional material for the movie was pretty cool. I like how it harkens back to the original cover art. Hamner also went on to write and draw a direct prequel to the original comic called Red Eyes Only. Of course, the success of the film made these comics possible, but what's even more impressive is that a sequel was greenlit immediately after the film's release.
What inspired you to build a second Krusty Krab right next door to the original?
Money!
Red 2 began filming in September 2012 and was released in July of 2013. Another pretty quick turnaround as far as most movies go. However, this time the movie didn't fare so well. Its box office earnings were $148 million. The budget was $84 million, which, accounting for marketing, bumps it up to $168 million, meaning the film was a financial disappointment. Reception to the movie was also lower than the first, with a 45% critical score and 63% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Despite this, there were still plans to continue the Red franchise further. Red 3 was greenlit before the release of the second movie, believing the hype train would continue after the sequel. This idea seems to have turned into a TV series, as in 2015 the creative team announced they'd be creating a show in this universe. But there's been no news of any continuation to that. The last thing we heard about this project was in 2017 when producer B. Bonaventura said he wasn't sure he'd be making Red 3, but that he was waiting on a script for it. The original guy pushing the product, Gregory Novak, left DC in 2011 due to restructuring at the company. By the time the Red film came out, both Iron Man 1 and 2 had come out. And just a year after, Captain America and Thor released as well. DC knew they needed to play catch up, and Gregory's vision just didn't seem to be cutting it. That's when they started preparing for the DCEU. I wonder how that turned out. So, I doubt he's gonna push for a continuation to the story. It seems like all movement on future projects related to Red have been stopped. And for now, the franchise is dead. Apparently in 2016, they announced they were gonna make a Hindi version of Red for the Indian market. As far as I know, this never took off. I mean, I found this movie, but I don't think it's related to this project at all. Now, in August 2024, which is a month before I recorded this, the first film was trending on Netflix. I don't think this will spark any interest from studios to continue the franchise, but hey, they made Morbius and Madam Web, so anything's possible. Alright, before we get into the final parts of the video, let me give my thoughts on these movies. So, I had a lot of fun watching. It was pretty cool seeing a bunch of older people being the lead action stars instead of your run-of-the-mill buff 30-year-old. It's a neat concept I hadn't really seen before. The comedy usually hits pretty well. It's not perfect or Deadpool levels of genius, but I got quite a few chuckles from the humor. The action sequences were a lot of fun. Victoria from MI6 was especially cool. It's funny seeing an old lady go like completely insane on mode.
I remember the Secret Service being tougher.
Me too.
That one didn't age quite so well.
Marvin was probably my favorite character in the series. This might be my favorite scene from the franchise. I also think these movies have some great casting. Bro, how'd they get Morgan Freeman and Anthony Hopkins for this? And their characters are actually well handled too. Oh, and they got Damien Dark from Arrow Season 4. I know that season sucked, but I really like the actor. He just has so much fun with every role he has. And Butcher from The Boys shows up too. Both were great antagonists in their films. I think I agree with the general consensus of these films. The first one is definitely better than the sequel. I enjoy them on the same level, but the sequel is much more convoluted and it has some weird editing choices. The first movie is much easier to follow and the humor lands better in my opinion. It also started becoming apparent that Bruce Willis was losing his ability to act, which I do think is a bit of a problem in the first movie, but it was much more obvious in the sequel. Now, that's no fault of Bruce Willis, not at all. He was diagnosed with aphasia and a specific form of dementia, which greatly affected not just his acting ability, but really his everyday life. My prayers go out to him and his family. It's just unfortunate that it affected him so early on. That aside, I do appreciate that the sequel referenced the comic much more, both with its intro and transitions to a new location. Some of this is directly from the comic, which I thought was cool. One weird change from the source material I didn't really understand were the name changes. Like in the comic, the main character's name is Paul Moses, whereas in the film it's Frank Moses. The handler's name is also different. In the comic it's Sally, whereas in the films it's Sarah. Like, why did you change the names? That genuinely makes no sense to me. Beasley and Kane, the CIA directors in the comic, also don't show up in the first movie, which is weird because the CIA is still going after Moses. Some weird changes, but nothing I'm too pressed about. Are these the best films ever made? No, nowhere near that. I wouldn't even say they're the best comic book related material, but they have a lot of heart in them. Clearly something modern superhero projects need help with. I do recommend them if you want a couple hours of pretty funny action. Now, this is going to go into speculation territory, but I genuinely think this franchise could have been a lot bigger than it was. Here's what Publishers Weekly had to say comparing the Red stories. Red the comic is about how America deals with the after effects of the Cold War, while Red the movie is more about old people beating up young people. Both share a few scenes, structure, and are highly entertaining, just in very different ways. This is especially highlighted by the differences in what the title means in each version. In the comic, Red stands for the status an agent declares upon themselves. It's like the traditional Code Red thing. In the movie, it's an acronym, meaning retired extremely dangerous. This might seem like a small difference, but it's a fundamental thematic and tonal shift. Both are technically plot devices, yes, but in the comic it also symbolizes the blood Paul Moses has on his hands. He's a monster, red in tooth and claw. The film is much more lighthearted, showing a bunch of old people almost comedically beating up youngsters because of experience. I wonder what would have happened if the films were a more direct adaptation to the comic. would they have become a cultural phenomenon? The reason I kept on saying as to why they chose a looser adaptation is because the comic story wouldn't have been enough for a full-length movie. And I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. Just look at John Wick. That first movie is about as simple a revenge story can get, and yet it's amazing. There are plenty of ways you could expand the story of the original comic and still be a near direct adaptation. Whether that be longer action sequences, more locations Paul has to visit for his journey. They could have dived more deeply into Paul's relationships with Sally and his niece. Seeing their reactions to who he truly was and how they would have treated him afterwards would have been really interesting. What's probably a more realistic answer to why it wasn't like the comic is that both the DC and Summit weren't willing to go all in on a rated R action flick. Which would make sense given studios didn't have much faith in those types of movies back then. I mean, John Wick was actually supposed to be released as a direct-to-DVD movie, but look how well that did. Everything about the Red comic is very similar to that story, and now John Wick is one of the most successful action franchises. And the first John Wick came out in 2014, only a year after Red 2. If the Red comic had a direct adaptation in 2010, would John Wick be as successful as it was? Or would it even exist? Maybe it was a few years too early, but had DC and the filmmakers made a gamble, I do think there's a chance Red would have been a really big franchise. Though I do want to note that it would have been coming right after the Jason Bourne trilogy. I could see people getting tired of the anti-CIA theme, but I think the formula is different enough that it could have worked. Again, not that the films as they stand right now are that bad or anything, I just think for many people they kind of lie in forgettable territory. But as I mentioned earlier, all of this is just speculation. I think it makes for a pretty interesting what if scenario. Regardless, it was neat seeing the life of this franchise and trying to understand how certain adaptations get made. I also got to read and learn about some comics I'd never heard of before. What are your thoughts on the Red franchise? Have you seen the movies or read the comics? And do you think James Gunn's new universe will have more direct adaptations of DC's characters? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.